Hi, ninth graders. We are finishing Into the Clouds today. We are reading the epilogue on page 221. As this is a true story, this is the ending, the true occurrences, if you will, of this group after they left K2. And by September, the surviving members of the 3rd American Karakoram expedition had all come home. Pete Schoening married his fiancée, Mel Duder, less than 2 weeks after he arrived in Seattle. Dean Molinar finally got to see his wife, Lee, and his daughter, Patty. But on the way home from the airport, Lee told him she wanted a divorce. The letter he had composed to her the day before they left Camp 8 stayed where he had written it, bound in his diary. Over the Christmas holidays, Bob Bates went off to spend 3 days with Art Gilkey's parents in Iowa. By that time, the Gilkeys had long held a letter from Houston explaining the details of their son's last days. The letter assured them that Art had died quickly in the end. It failed to mention the bloody rocks they had seen above Camp 6. Houston concluded this way: "Nothing I can tell you will help, I am afraid, but I can say that no group of people have ever come closer together in toil and danger than have we. Art was a splendid man and closer to us than many families." The 2 members of the expedition family who suffered most on the way down the mountain, Bob Craig and George Bell, recovered almost fully. Craig had no lasting effects from his frostbite. Bell arrived home on a stretcher. At Massachusetts General Hospital, they managed to save everything except 2 toes. On the way back to the United States, Bell had been asked by reporters to describe K2. "It's a savage mountain," he said from his stretcher. "It tries to kill you." If K2 really was defending its slopes with evil intent, it failed to scare Charlie Houston. Before he left India, he was already telling reporters he would come back to take on the mountain again. Back in New Hampshire, Houston reunited with his kids, settled into his work as a doctor, and secured a permit to climb K2 in 1955. Then on August 4th, 1954, he got a message that sent his life veering in another direction. 5 days earlier, exactly a year after Schoening and Gilkey reached the site of their highest camp, 2 members of an Italian expedition had climbed the rocks where Pasang Lama made his evening ultimatum to Fritz Wiesner, slipped past the giant overhanging serac, slogged up the final snow slope, and stood on the summit of K2. Houston was devastated. He sat down and wrote to a friend, "There are other hills, other interests. But K2 filled my heart and head for 16 years. Nothing can replace them, no second ascents, no other mountains. That phase of my life is over. Perhaps I shall grow up, but right now I feel that I have grown down." The next day, Houston went off by himself on an errand to Nashua, New Hampshire, about 40 miles away from home. By the time he got there, he had no idea who he was. He did not remember nearly reaching the summit of Nanda Devi or losing Art Gilkey on K2. He did not know he had a wife and 3 kids and a medical practice in Exeter. He had lost every shred of his memory. Somehow, Houston found his way to a hospital in Nashua, disoriented and distraught. A policeman noticed a label on his tie from a shop in Exeter, and after a couple of phone calls, Dorcas appeared at the hospital to bring Charlie home. No one could explain why Houston lost his memory, but within 24 hours, it came back. With it came the ghost of his ordeal on K2. When he left for a family vacation in the Adirondacks a few days later, the scene of Gilkey's final moments on the rocks above Camp 6 haunted him. The sight of the blood and the dangling sleeping bag had been too painful to talk about, even with his climbing partners. Now, as he drove the back roads of Vermont and New York, he imagined he saw splotches of blood leaking through the pavement, just like the stained rocks on K2. Charlie Houston never climbed again. The members of the Third American Karakoram Expedition stayed friends for the rest of their lives. They exchanged letters. They got together for reunions. In 1958, Pete Schoening returned to the Himalayas to climb the 26,510-foot peak, Gasherbrum 1. On the way back, he detoured past K2 and stood for a while at the base of Art Gilkey's cairn. Since then, the 10-foot tall pile of stones has become a monument to all the climbers who have lost their lives on K2. It's covered in metal plaques that jingle in the wind, each of them a testament to someone who decided, as a young Charlie Houston once wrote, to take risk rather than die within from rot. None of the plaques tell a story as iconic as the one the cairn was built to commemorate. Over the years, the effort made to save Art Gilkey has become, for many people, a model of heroism in the mountains. Pete Schoening's ice axe is famous among climbers for its role in the belay that saved 6 men. It sits on display at the American Alpine Club Library in Golden, Colorado. The story of the climb is told again and again on anniversaries of the expedition. It is now one of the great legends of the mountains, wrote the British climber Jim Curran. In the annals of Himalayan climbing, there is nothing finer than this. Charlie Houston and the others didn't see themselves as heroes. Houston was racked with guilt over losing Art Gilkey, and it was a big reason why he quit climbing for good. As the prime mover for the expedition and the doctor, I had failed, he wrote later. We did not reach the summit, and I have been unable to save our friend's life. That our peers praise us for actions we saw implicit in the mountain spirit is irrelevant. What exactly is this mountain spirit that was so important to Houston? The day before he suffered his attack of amnesia, he wrote a letter to the New York Times about the Italian expedition. He praised them for their courage and their perseverance. But he also lamented the fact that the Italians had conquered the mountain with a military-like expedition. 500 porters lugged 10 tons of supplies to the mountain for them. Included in the loads were 230 oxygen tanks. The leader of the expedition, Ardito Desio, even flew around the mountain in a plane to scout their route. To Houston, the Italians had accomplished the goal but left the experience itself empty. I hope more climbers will make expeditions for the love of climbing rather than for pride of conquest, he wrote. I would not deny that the summit matters and matters greatly, but I know that the rewards of climbing live in the venture and not alone in the triumph. It is the means which calls us to the end, not the end which justifies the means. Climbers, all men indeed, will be more rewarded by their exertions if freed from the compulsion to win. As a group, climbers tend to be ambitious, driven people. At some point on some mountain, most of them have to weigh their ambition to summit against the risk of pushing forward, their competitive drive against a commitment to their teammates. In 1939, Fritz Wiesner climbed on K2 possessed by the desire to conquer the mountain. Somewhere on the slopes, Wiesner, Durrance, Wolf, and the rest of the expedition lost touch with one another. They climbed roped together, but the bond was purely physical. In the end, 4 lives were lost and nothing was won. In 1953, de Molenaar was humbled by K2. Stuck in the storm at 25,000 feet, he decided he didn't need the summit. He found a way to accept defeat without a blow to the ego or pride. On the way down during the brutal night at Camp 7, he took off his jacket and draped it over the injured Charlie Houston. Houston's expedition didn't reach the top of K2. They lost Art Gilkey on the way down, but they discovered something more important in the summit of the world's second highest peak. According to the Italian climber Reinhold Messner, they failed in the most beautiful way you can imagine. And that is the end. An excellent book. There are books similar to this that have been made into movies. One of them is Into Thin Air. I imagine this one is an opportunity for a movie too. I hope you've enjoyed this read, and tomorrow we will begin Silo. So find that in your bags or where you've placed it when you received it in March, and we'll begin Silo tomorrow. Thanks so much, ninth graders. Take care now.